Because when the CHRO is always busy, the business gets process instead of leadership. It gets responsiveness instead of foresight. It gets a highly capable person applying their judgment to work that does not require it. And the actual strategic contribution, the things that only a CHRO operating at enterprise altitude can produce, it never gets made. Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today we're going to name something that almost never gets said out loud in the CHRO conversation. Here it is. The most dangerous CHRO isn't the one who makes bad decisions. It's the one who never has time to make decisions at all. Now, I've sat across from CHROs who are clearly the hardest working professional in the building. A full calendar, every meeting attended, always responsive, never dropping the ball. The CEO describes them as indispensable. I would call them trapped. And the difference between those two descriptions is exactly what this episode is about today. But before we get started, let me ask you for a quick favor. If you find value in these conversations, please take a minute right now and like, subscribe, or follow the Talent Sherpa podcast wherever you get your shows. It helps more senior leaders find the show, and it allows us to keep doing this work for the larger HR community. And I also wanted to tell you a little bit about the CHRO Ascent Academy. This is our cohort-based program for sitting CHROs. We're about ready to launch another one for leaders who are actively preparing to step into the role. It's a practical, peer-driven experience. It's designed to give you all the help you need to build the altitude, the mandate clarity, and the strategic relationships that your role actually requires. We're currently building out the next cohort. Everything you need to sign up for the wait list is at mytalentsherpa.com. All right, let's dive into this. Here is a scene that I have watched play out more than once. The CHRO finishes a 12-hour day. They're at 8 meetings. They resolved 3 employee relations issues. They reviewed 2 offer letters. They sat in a benefits committee call. And then they personally coached a struggling HR business partner through a difficult conversation with one of their senior leaders. On the drive home, they're still taking phone calls. They might even be answering emails when the traffic stops. By 9 o'clock at night, they're still responding to Slack messages from a senior leader who needs a quick HR read on something. They are exhausted in every sense of the word, but they are proud of what they accomplished. And they didn't spend one single hour of that day on work that only the CHRO can do. And that's the pattern. And it runs much deeper than time management. It runs through the structure of the role itself. So when a CHRO is consistently in execution mode, when they are always the ones closing the loops, attending the calls, and keeping all the plates spinning, it usually means one of 3 things is true. Could mean the team isn't capable to own what they should already be owning. Could mean the role was never built at the right altitude to begin with. Or it might mean that the CHRO hasn't built the organizational influence required to operate above the day-to-day. And all 3 of these are structural problems. None of them can be solved by working harder. And the harder the CHRO works, the more invisible these problems become, because from the outside, everything looks fine. Things are getting done. Nothing's dropping. The CHRO looks both capable and committed. But what they really are is stuck. Because when the CHRO is always busy, the business gets process instead of leadership. It gets responsiveness instead of foresight. It gets a highly capable person applying their judgment to work that does not require it. And the actual strategic contribution, the things that only a CHRO operating at enterprise altitude can produce, it never gets made. So here's the first trap that I think most leaders fall into. They mistake busyness for contribution. When you are moving constantly, it feels like work is happening, and it is. The problem is that visible results at the functional level are not the same as enterprise results. A CHRO who resolves issues, fills roles, runs a clean operation is producing real output. But that output is not what the CEO actually needs from someone in that particular seat. The CEO doesn't need another operator. They need someone with time to think. And the CHRO who's perpetually in execution mode, they've quietly removed themselves from the one category of work that would actually move the enterprise. Now, the second trap is the indispensability loop. This is where being needed at the functional level becomes the dominant signal of value. The CHRO is involved in literally everything. They know all the details, they resolve the hard calls, they catch whatever falls through the cracks. And the business functions because of them. That produces a form of positive reinforcement that is almost impossible to resist. People thank you, the CEO calls you essential, the work feels meaningful because it is always urgent. But urgent is not strategic. And indispensable at the operating level often masks invisibility at the strategic level. I worked with a CHRO some time ago who was, by any objective measure, unbelievably capable. She had built a highly functioning HR operation. Her team respected her. They reacted well to her. The business trusted her. And when I looked at her calendar across the 4-week period, she had roughly 6 hours total that were unscheduled. 6 hours in a month that were not committed to a call, a meeting, or some form of deliverable. And when I asked her what she would do with 10 more unscheduled hours per week, she went quiet for a moment, and then she said, yeah, I'd probably have the time finally to think about where we're headed. That sentence told me everything, and it should tell you the same thing. She had been running so hard that foresight had become a luxury that she couldn't afford. Now, the third trap is what I call altitude drift. This is where the leader hired into a strategic role gradually descends into functional execution over time, usually without noticing. And it happens incrementally, one commitment at a time, one meeting that makes sense to attend, one problem that just it seems easier to solve personally than to build the team's capacity to own it. And after 6 months or maybe even up to a year, a CHRO is operating 2 levels below their mandate, and the organization has quietly recalibrated its expectations of them accordingly. So here's the shift that changes how you see this. A CHRO's job is not to be busy. A CHRO's job is to build a system that executes without them so that they can spend time shaping what the system is designed to do. Now, that's a fundamentally different orientation. It means the measure of a CHRO is not their personal throughput. It's the capacity of the system that they've built to sustain performance when they step back. A CHRO operating at enterprise altitude is a system architect. They are designing the human operating system. They are shaping how decisions get made, and how talent gets deployed, and how leaders develop, and how the organization learns. That work rarely appears on a calendar as a meeting. It shows up as thinking time, relationship investment, pattern recognition, a strategic conversation. And here's what all that requires: margin, unscheduled time, cognitive bandwidth that is not already committed to execution. When a CHRO's calendar is at capacity, they cannot do the work. Not because they lack the skill, far from it, but because the structure leaves no room for the work. Now, mandate clarity is what creates these conditions for the right work. A CHRO whose mandate is defined explicitly around enterprise outcomes will naturally protect the time and the relationships required to operate at that level. A CHRO whose mandate is functionally defined, or worse, never clearly defined at all, where they're going to fill their calendar with functional work because that is what the system rewards and the role appears to require. An overloaded calendar is not a time management problem. It is a mandate problem. And those two require different solutions. So what do you do about it? Here's first play. Run the calendar diagnostic. I do this with all of my coaching CHROs. Pull your last 4 weeks of calendar data, categorize it, and every block is either execution, management, or strategic enterprise work. Strategic enterprise work is anything that directly shapes how the business thinks, decides, or deploys talent at the top of the house. Everything else falls into one of the first 2 categories. So if execution and management account for more than 60% of your time, you have now identified the constraint with great levels of precision. And you cannot solve it by trying harder. You can only solve it by changing what your calendar is built to protect. Play number 2 is to identify what is on your calendar that somebody else should own. Not what could theoretically be delegated in an ideal world. We don't live there. but what specifically is on your calendar this week that represents a failure of team capability or a failure of role clarity? Those are two different problems with two different solutions. Team capability requires development, maybe even an upgrade. Role clarity requires a direct conversation and a clean handoff. But both are your responsibility to solve. Neither are going to get solved by continuing to do the work yourself. Now, play 3 is to build a strategic margin into your calendar as a structural commitment. So before you start the week, block the time before it fills. Protect it the way you would protect a board meeting or a CEO one-with-one. Like, those don't get moved, do they? They don't get reallocated just because someone wants you. The executive who does not protect unstructured time for thinking, in fact, they don't think strategically. It's amazing how it works, right? They react strategically, if at all. Most of the time, they just react. And those two produce very different outcomes. Now, play 4 is to name the work that only you can do and then check your calendar against the list. So think about this. There is a very specific set of things that only a CHRO can do. No one in the organization can substitute for it. Like shaping CEO alignment on the most consequential talent decisions, or building board level confidence in the leadership pipeline, designing the incentive architecture for decision rights that govern how the senior executive team actually operates. Like developing 1 or 2 levels down to the leaders who are going to carry the enterprise accountability into the next generation of the business. Like, you get the drift. If those things are not on your calendar with regularity, they're not happening. And the business is actually losing value. It doesn't even know that it's losing. And then play 5 is to have the mandate conversation explicitly with your CEO. Ask them directly, what does success in this role look like over the next 18 to 24 months in terms that matter to the business? Listen carefully to the answer. If the answer is primarily operational, ta-da, you have a mandate problem and an opening to renegotiate it. If the answer is strategic, then you need to ask yourself honestly whether your current calendar reflects that mandate. The gap between those two things, that's the work. So here's the question worth sitting with before we close. If someone were to look at your calendar without knowing your title, what job would they think that you had? That's not a rhetorical question. It has a very, very, very precise answer. And that answer tells you something real. Your calendar is your strategy. So if there's one thing I want you to carry out of this episode, it's this. If you never have time to think, you are doing somebody else's job, and you're probably leaving your own undone. That's it for today. So thank you so much for spending time with me. I appreciate you being a part of this community of senior leaders who want to rethink how human capital really works. Big shout out to my friend Megan from Denver, and thank you for listening, whether you're in Wyoming, Minnesota, who knew, or Barcelona, Spain. This community keeps growing, and that is because of you. Now, if you're thinking, how do I apply this in my own situation? Let me point you to a couple places. If the role clarity is where you want to start, and honestly, it should be, then check out getpropulsion.ai. They have AI teammates that enable your leadership to focus on the work that actually drives business outcomes. And if you're a first-time CHRO or you are preparing to step into the role, I would love to work with you. We have built practical tools to help you make an impact from day one. You can find everything you need over at mytalentsherpa.com. And if you're interested in reading more about these topics, you can do it at my best-selling Substack, talentsherpa.substack.com. So until next time, keep raising the bar. Keep protecting the time your real work requires. And keep on climbing.